If it's Friday, President Biden bashes MAGA Republicans and the former president for being enemies of democracy. It was a primetime speech with echoes of 2020. Why it matters for 2022, perhaps 2024, in just a moment. Plus, the pandemic learning loss. 2 years of COVID erases decades of reading and math progress for America's children. That story and where classrooms need to go from here. And later, the triple-digit forecast. Excessive heat, blackout warnings, and health dangers across western states this weekend. We're going to get into who's impacted the most. Happy Friday and welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Chuck Todd. So the calendar claims we're heading into Labor Day weekend 2022, but things are starting to feel an awful like the dog days of 2020. It's like we're reliving a meme. Joe Biden and Donald Trump front and center. Their dire warnings about the future of our democracy at the fore. Oh, by the way, Tony Fauci was warning about a flu uptick in the next couple of months, plus with COVID. So again, keeping with our It's Always 2020 approach. At an official White House address last night at Philadelphia's Independence Hall, mere feet from where the Constitution was drafted and signed, President Biden accused his predecessor, Donald John Trump, and his MAGA Republican acolytes of ignoring our founding documents and undermining the sanctity of American elections.
MAGA Republicans do not respect the Constitution. They do not believe in the rule of law. They do not recognize the will of the people. They refuse to accept the results of a free election. They look at the mob that stormed the United States Capitol on January 6th, brutally attacking law enforcement, not as insurrectionists who placed a dagger at the throat of our democracy, but they look at them as patriots. And they see their MAGA failure to stop a peaceful transfer of power after the 2020 election as preparation for the 2022 and 2024 elections.
President Biden's remarks were long planned, but the former president is giving those words new resonance. In the past week, Mr. Trump once again called for a redo of the 2020 election based on his delusions over the Hunter Biden investigation. Just yesterday, he said he would issue pardons and a government apology to all of the rioters who stormed the Capitol on January 6th if he becomes president again. Mr. Trump has already responded to President Biden's remarks on his social media website, but he will have the chance to strike back live with remarks scheduled in Pennsylvania tomorrow evening. And that might be exactly what the White House wants. Hence, our framing that it's still 2020, no matter what the calendar says. President Biden's remarks fit with the Democratic Party's growing push to turn the November midterms into a choice between President Biden's vision and former President Trump's vision, as opposed to a referendum on the party in power. In effect, it's 2020 again and again and again. By singling out Trump, the Republican Party could in turn rally around the former president, tying them to one of the few national figures who is even less popular than President Biden. In an explicit call to the ballot box, President Biden yesterday essentially called on the coalition that elected him in 2020 to rush to the nation's defense again and take on MAGA Republicans.
We're all called by duty and conscience to confront extremists who put their own pursuit of power above all else. Democrats, independents, mainstream Republicans. This work is the work of democracy, the work of this generation. It is the work of our time, for all time. We can't afford to leave anyone on the sidelines. We need everyone to do their part. So speak up, speak out, get engaged, vote, vote, vote.
My colleague Shannon Pettypiece is outside the White House. So Shannon, it was interesting to see the president today and how I think he certainly is taking issue, or maybe with himself, about how some people are being a bit critical of the tone, or is he helping to divide things? I'm curious, how does the White House think this played today?
Well, there is this needle that they're trying to thread here. on a couple of fronts. I'd say the first is, I think you're maybe alluding to the remarks the president made a bit earlier, where he said he was asked if he was criticizing all Trump supporters. And he was saying, no, not all Trump supporters, but the Trump supporters who are in favor of a violent insurrection, who, deny that Trump lost the election, this very specific slice of extreme voters, but trying not to categorize this as an attack on all of the millions of people who voted for Trump. A bit of a needle they're trying to thread there in the idea that there are still some Republicans out there who may be persuadable, who may identify themselves with the Republican Party in some way, but don't identify themselves with the January 6th insurrectionists or with the election deniers. So there's that front as well. And I think there is also an awareness about the desire to continue to be the unifying president. That was a message that resonated with a certain group of voters in 2020 that helped bring them out to the ballot. And they want to maintain that. And the White House has said that they believe talking about defending democracy and talking about upholding the rule of law is something that should unite all Americans. It shouldn't be a red or a blue issue, though clearly it increasingly is becoming one when you look at comments that come from Republican officials. So it is a balance and a dance that they're trying to do here. I think the White House feels like this speech last night went off as planned. It was on script. In the White House's opinion, they feel it was strong, it was direct, it was clear. It conveyed the message that they wanted to convey, which was a very strong condemnation of former President Donald Trump, who is obviously increasingly in the headlines, as well as those allies of his who are currently running in the midterm elections.
Well, Shannon Pettypiece, it was certainly a speech that had a lot in it. So we are going to spend a little more time talking about it with a larger group of people. Shannon, really appreciate your reporting. Thank you. So joining me now on set, we got Mark Murray. He's our senior political editor, my partner behind First Read. Cornell Belcher, Democratic pollster and an NBC News political analyst. Sara Fagen, a Republican strategist, former White House political director under President Bush, also with us, and also an NBC News contributor. And also with us is presidential historian Michael Beschloss. So I kind of like this. I got two partisans. I got a day of reporter, and I got an historian, because I want to put it in that, because I made the pros and cons list of this speech, and I can make a tactical political argument, the larger, and you see, okay, he sounded the alarm. It's fitting with the November plans. I tactically understand what he's doing. Was it a good party leader speech or a good presidential speech, Cornell?
Well, I'll lean into, Beschloss on this, but when I watched the speech, Chuck, I have not seen a more important speech, I think, since a president give outside of wartime since the Civil Rights Movement. It is a speech that, to me, was larger than partisanship. He was the president of the United States saying we have threats to our democracy and we Americans need to rally around, and it's not red or blue. And some of the Republicans on the other side, you have room to come in because this is about democracy. I thought it was a very presidential speech. I did not see it as a partisan speech at all. Of course, our friends at Fox saw it as a partisan speech.
I understand that. All right, Sara, give me yours.
It was a political speech. It was not a presidential speech. I don't think anything about it was particularly presidential. First of all, tactically, it was smart, right? Because the best chance for Democrats to win in November is to run an election against Donald Trump. Donald Trump's not on the ballot, but he is in the news all day, every day. Some of that is his doing, but last night was really about, in my view, Biden trying to make the midterms about Donald Trump.
Mark, what did you feel like you saw?
All the above. How about that, Chuck? But, also, I think it was a timely speech. And we have to actually look at, we're now headed into the Labor Day holiday, and pretty much the primary calendar is behind us. And after January 6th, and even the months behind, there was always this talk about, yes, the Republican Party is still Donald Trump's party, but just how Republican is it? And now we actually end up seeing who ended up winning these primary contests in key races across the country. Carrie Lake ended up winning for Arizona governor. You end up having Tudor Dixon Nixon, for Michigan governor, you end up having just like candidates who were picked by Donald Trump and endorsed by Trump who are running in some key battlegrounds.
What's the risk here? You and I were discussing, what was the risk for Biden?
So that's the time. The risk here for Biden is there was two speeches in a lot of ways. And the Republican Party still is, to this day, is divided over Donald Trump. Our polling bears that out. I think Republican operatives who speak with us, that bears that out. And there are Republicans who admit that Joe Biden did win 2020, that admit the sky is blue, and a couple examples in Brian Kemp in Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State in Georgia, who said Joe Biden ended up winning. Right. And the question but if the totality of that speech is almost as if, well, those people need to be defeated too for us to actually restore democracy.
That's the issue here, which is to say that the White House says this was a speech to unite Americans. Actually, there were a lot of Republicans who weren't MAGA Republicans who looked at that and cringed and thought, wait a second.
You're giving us two choices that we don't like.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so in that respect, it was anything but unifying.
But if you
let me bring in Michael, because our remote guy's getting, look at what we're doing here. So because
getting locked out.
Exactly. I don't want to lock you out. And Michael, you can speak to this really well. There are many speeches that we look back historically and think, wow, what are great speeches, that when they were given at the time were considered partisan, divisive.
As you well know, Chuck.
Right. So, in fact, a producer of mine sent me an editorial recently from a newspaper in Pennsylvania apologizing for trashing Lincoln in 1863. The apology.
Just what I was thinking of. Gettysburg was panned.
So I'm mindful of that. So put that eye to this speech. What are your thoughts? Will it live?
I think it'll live, and I should preface this by saying that there was a meeting that President Biden had with historians about democracy last month that I was in. We weren't asked, we did not give political advice or speech advice. I didn't even know there was going to be a speech. But that having been said, I think the definition of a presidential speech is when a president frames the biggest issue facing the American people at the time of an election. And I would go so far as to say, Chuck, that 50 years from now, if a historian from the future came back to 2022 and said, what's the biggest issue as the fall begins in 2022? It's not infrastructure. It's not inflation, as important as those things are. It is, to my mind, that we are in danger of losing our democratic system, especially rule of law and also elections being infringed upon. Free and fair elections, we now may have the prospect that in a lot of states, the losers may be declared illicitly the winners. I think that's the biggest thing. Lincoln said that in 1860. Roosevelt did in 1940. That's what presidents do.
Michael, and to the panel, and Cornell, I want you to jump in here, but it was a conversation I had with somebody this morning that said, there's a large majority of the country that wants Donald Trump to go away. There is a division between that large chunk about how much of a threat he is in the near term. And that is really what animates, I think, the different factions that fight Trump, whether it's the anti-Trumpers that stay Republican, et cetera.
Well,
is that fair?
I think that's fair, but let's unpack this a little bit further, right? He is speaking to look. The Wall Street Journal poll just came out, showed 66% of independents think our democracy is under threat. We could lose democracy. So he is in fact speaking to the broader sort of issue of what's happening in America, and without question, Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans are part of that problem. Now, MAGA Republicans aren't all Republicans, and to that point, he talked about that, right? There's, the Liz Cheneys of the Republican Party, they're not the majority of the Republican Party anymore. However, you put the Liz Cheneys of the Republican Party together with the Obama-Biden coalition, and you have a pretty sizable majority, and I think that's what he was going for in this speech.
Is there a wedge in the GOP right now, Sara? Would you accept that or not?
Yes. So there is and there isn't. There's a wedge among kind of what you would call the ruling class of the Republican Party.
That's a nice way of putting it.
And, I think among the base, there's not much of a wedge. Democrats find the democracy argument very unifying. It's very motivating in polls. They buy it. I think Republicans, by and large, look at January 6th as an aberration and don't look at that as a huge fear moving forward. And so when Republicans hear a speech like last night, they really hear it as a political speech, which is what I believe it was.
I have a feeling, Mark, that we're going to have a different take on the speech depending on what Donald Trump says tomorrow.
Yeah, and Chuck, to me, this is, as you were just kind of setting up earlier, this was a lot of bait for Donald Trump to go on and denounce Joe Biden.
And we know how disciplined he is about ignoring bait.
And we end up having another news cycle, another year, another election where it is Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. And we saw the results of that in the 2020 presidential election, where Joe Biden won by 4.5 percentage points over Donald Trump. And we've talked about this so many times. What makes this midterm cycle so unique is the party out of power usually gets to say, hey, we're brand new. We chucked the losing presidential candidate to the side. We have new leaders who are actually coming in. We represent something fresh. And Donald Trump hasn't allowed himself to disappear from the stage. And that's kind of why we're fighting 2020
I do think that's the GOP's
But this is the problem.
Yeah,
Again, I'm going to give you this for free. I don't know what House Republicans' plan is. I don't know what Mitch McConnell's plan is, because Donald Trump's always in the news. And House Republicans and Mitch McConnell, that's got to be driving them crazy, because their message can't break through because it's Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump.
Where the former president has hurt himself, particularly with the events of these investigations, as well as some of the commentary yesterday about redoing the election, is that what it does is it emboldens more people to run against him and more people to say, I don't really care if he runs. I'm in this. And that is not probably good for his prospects.
You know, Michael, I'm going to make you live in the historic part of this country, go back in history, which is Donald Trump this week felt like Joe McCarthy 1956, 57 before he died. Just some of the crazy stuff he was saying. Like, it's as if he's trying to play the hits again and hoping it somehow brings back his coalition. You know, maybe if I pardon everybody. And it's almost like he's getting, again, in order to create the outrage, he's got to be more outrageous.
No, that's right. And I won't say he's throwing ketchup at the wall, but he sure is throwing one kind of Jell-O at the wall one after another to see if any of this is going to stick. That's not a sign of strength. But I think in a way that many people did not realize two years ago, let's say that Donald Trump fades away within the next month or two, which is not impossible given this scandal over classified documents.
I mean, Michael, I don't mean to pause you there. Do you know how many times that phrase has been uttered by so many people? Probably by every one of us at this table and you, right?
All of us. Yeah. But you have not had a situation where a president had classified documents that may have been going to people who used them to kill CIA agents or spread nuclear secrets. May happen, may not. But if he is gone, my point is MAGA Republicanism will remain, and Joe Biden could give the same speech.
Now that's an interesting. I don't know if I agree. I think we're all trying to figure that out. If Donald Trump goes away tomorrow, Sara, does the MAGA movement basically fade away?
I don't think it fades away. I think it takes a different form. I mean, this all assumes that we forget really what Donald Trump, when he came in and won that primary.
He did find a constituency that existed.
He found a constituency that was not represented by either party. And he has channeled that into a movement. Yeah. And so the question really becomes, who is going to pick up that mantle? And right now, the Republican Party has changed so dramatically from when I worked for a president. It's
astonishing. Yeah.
That I don't think it's going to move back. It's not going to go back to where it was when President Bush was in office. Yeah. But it's not going to also, be people, parading through the Capitol either.
Yeah, that to me is the question. I don't know, and I don't know how Trump fades away if he's still.
You want me in on this?
I'm sure you have an opinion.
No,
or is it a hope?
You can't. Well, I do hope it fades away, but it's not going to fade away because the predicate for Trump is right in front of us. It's the changes and the anxiety of what's happening in this country right now. And over the next couple of years, Chuck, that's not going to get less. It's actually going to grow even more.
Why do you think it's going to get less? Because isn't it the aging population is why it's the older voter, it's the older crowd in America that doesn't like these changes, and they're the heart of this, and as that fades.
And every generation, going back to my grandfather, has been saying the same thing. Oh, it's the old people. And every generation, we're back at this point. And it's only going to get worse.
Wait till we're the old people.
We're already the old people. But to my point, it's not going to change because, quite frankly, in the next 10, 15 years, this country is going to be awfully close to being a majority-minority country.
Let me ask you, Michael, what's more likely, that the Republican Party survives Trump or Trump destroys the Republican Party and a new conservative party has to be built?
No, I think what would happen if Trump does fade away for this reason or any other would be that someone else takes over those issues. Take a look at your home state of Florida. Mm-hmm. I mean, what Governor DeSantis has done there, some of those things Donald Trump could only dream of, mm-hmm. and that could be a template for what Republicans want to do in the future, and Donald Trump could be nowhere. So what this could be is like the Republican Party after Richard Nixon in 1974, where a lot of Republican leaders who abased themselves mm-hmm. before Nixon and covered for him on Watergate are embarrassed about that, barely mention his name, but a lot of his ideas live on.
Mark, what's amazing this week is how many stories we were seeing this week on Republicans scrubbing their websites. Not just of abortion, but of Trump.
Yeah, because we're in general election time right now. Mm-hmm. But they're seeing the same polling that we see, that right now, and particularly after this investigation into the Mar-a-Lago search, that Donald Trump's more unpopular than Joe Biden is, despite all the issues that Joe Biden has actually had to deal with. And so right now, again, when you end up sizing, if we're fighting 2020 all over again in 2022 or 2024, you have to give the slight advantage to the Democrats.
All right, this is a quick answer for the both of you. It's Friday before Labor Day. You've both been in this business a long time. When is the next poll? We think we see a change in what the midterm landscape looks like. When will that be confirmed to you? Is it the third week of September? When does that get confirmed to you or not confirmed?
I think probably the third week of September.
That's what
I was going to say September 15th.
Yeah, okay, so in between.
Remember, in 2018, Republicans in August had a really bad month. Many of the people who won by 6 or 8 points were down.
Okay.
And so
That's what there's always something in September.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
we got a couple more weeks. All right. Great way to start off. Thank you, Mark, Cornell, Sara, and Michael. What a way to get started. Coming up, the new grand jury testimony from the Pats, plural, Mar-a-Lago document details, and a new, potentially more intriguing January 6th witness who used to carry the title Speaker of the House. All this as we await a judge's decision on former President Trump's special master request. The latest on all of these investigations next. Plus, 2.5 years ago, the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted lives and classrooms nationwide. And now a report lays bare just how severe the education setbacks really are. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. We have a lot to catch you up on when it comes to all these investigations involving the former president, as we await the federal judge's decision on whether an independent special review master will review the documents that were already obtained from the Mar-a-Lago search. We're getting a more detailed picture of what those documents included. The judge ordered the inventory list from the search to be unsealed, and that was done this morning. So here's the inventory. The FBI search turned up more than 40 empty folders with classified banners. They also found nearly 4 dozen empty folders marked return to staff secretary/military aide, as well as more than 10,000 government documents and photographs without classification markings. Perhaps most importantly, the inventory reveals that many documents were found in boxes and containers inside Donald Trump's office, which undermines what his lawyers told investigators about all records from the White House being kept in a Mar-a-Lago storage room. Meanwhile, 2 of the top lawyers from the Trump administration, Pat Cipollone and Patrick Philbin, testified today before a federal grand jury investigating January 6th. Separate investigation from the congressional investigation, by the way. Cipollone, who served as White House counsel that day, answered questions from the January 6th committee before this is the grand jury. Now, that committee, by the way, January 6th committee, not the grand jury, is now requesting testimony from, ready for this, Newt Gingrich. In a letter sent yesterday, the January 6th committee chair, Benny Thompson, asked that former House Speaker answer questions about his involvement in Donald Trump's effort to overturn the elections. And it's an intriguing reason why. So to bring you up to date, I'm joined now by Ryan Reilly. He covers the Justice Department for NBC News, and Sahil Kapur, the senior national political reporter for NBC News. So Sahil's got our January 6th investigation business, and Ryan's taking care here of our special masterclass. So Ryan, let's start with this, with what we're waiting for. It's possibly any minute now, which is why you're in a separate studio. What do we expect?
Any minute we could find out whether or not the special master will be appointed. I think that the biggest question isn't only the special master. I think it's whether or not this is going to be about just about attorney-client privilege, in which case this is a very small subset of the documents, or whether this goes broader and this becomes more about executive privilege, which really could be pretty unprecedented and would have a pretty deep impact on the ongoing investigation. You know, if this is just attorney-client privilege, this is pretty simple. The FBI was able to get through that pretty quickly, set those documents aside, and wouldn't impact the investigation. But, you know, executive privilege would be a whole different ballgame. And that's executive privilege isn't something that's typically known to be held by a former president. That's something that is up to Biden, the current president, to determine, Chuck.
Well, in fact, Ryan, yesterday Andrew Weissman said he thought if she ruled on it and made executive privilege part of this ruling, that justice would fight that, they would appeal that immediately, because they feel like their case would be very strong on appeal.
Yes, I mean, I think it would be. I think that's where I think they would appeal this very quickly, because that would really be a major step back to the investigation. They might be able to live with a limited special master that would just be about attorney-client privilege, because Donald Trump isn't a lawyer. It's not a Rudy Giuliani situation where he has all these clients. He is the client, so he shouldn't have that much material that would be protected by attorney-client privilege, Chuck.
All right, Sahil, now let's go to the other investigation, one of the other investigations, this one on Capitol Hill, the January 6th investigation. That letter yesterday, we're all sitting here worried about the Mar-a-Lago search. Newt Gingrich, and it was interesting what they discovered. This seems to be very recent evidence that's been turned over, some text messages that suddenly made them think, we need to speak to him.
It definitely seems to be recent. Otherwise, they would have put out this letter a long time ago if this information came to them earlier. Specifically, what they're alleging is that Newt Gingrich had contact with senior individuals close to Trump at the time who had knowledge or potentially involvement in the plot to overturn the 2020 election, that he gave direct advice, that Newt Gingrich gave direct advice on TV ads promoting false claims about the 2020 election.
These were ads that ran in December, right?
Exactly.
In small markets, right?
Through the
National
December
cable.
14th deadline. Yeah. And it was not just that. That's, of course, the deadline for states to certify their votes and send them to Congress. But also, the committee says they have evidence that Newt Gingrich specifically talked about the need to arouse the country's anger and bring pressure on legislators and governors. That sure sounds like he was part of that plot. Now, I've got to say, I'm struck by Newt Gingrich's ability to be everywhere. This man is the Forrest Gump of Republican politics. He has not held power for 23 years in any kind of legislative office, yet anytime there's a major event in the party, from elections to insurrections to policy agenda to secret meetings, there he is right there in the frame.
Well, he was the spouse of an ambassador, I think, and he obviously ran for president for a period of time, was a front runner for about a primary, and that moved on. Have we heard from the former speaker? Has he responded to this request yet?
We have not on his public profiles, at least. It doesn't appear that he has responded. I don't expect him. It'll be interesting to see how he handles this. I don't expect him to go full political martyr in the way that Steve Bannon did. He, you know, he does have a reputation for being
but he respects the institution of Congress, right?
Exactly.
There is this one line he's going to walk, I assume.
Yeah, he was a former Speaker of the House. You know, he does have a reputation as being a flamethrower, but he does try to maintain an element of legitimacy, too.
Hey, Ryan, last question. Let me get you out on this, which is simply the inventory list. Was there anything in there that if you were Donald Trump's lawyers, you're like, yeah, this will change things? I didn't see anything, but I'm just curious.
Trump's lawyer?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I mean, because just broadly, it's 10,000, 11,000 government documents that he wasn't supposed to have. Now, you can argue that, you know, this wasn't something that would be criminally enforced, but it's just like not what the law says. The law says what you're supposed to do is turn over all of those presidential records to the National Archives, and we have that because of Richard Nixon. That's who we have to thank for that law being in place. There's future generations are going to have to look back at what happened during the Trump presidency, and you need the record in order to do that. That's why that law is in place. The classified documents are really what puts this over the top and gets this closer to a prosecution forthcoming potentially, but all the facts are just bad for him, frankly.
Well, it seems like every court filing his team has made has only made this worse for him. Anyway, Ryan Reilly, Sahil Kapur, thank you both. Up next, the catastrophic learning loss. We all thought it was going to happen, and new data reveals that it did happen during the pandemic in math and reading. We're going to dive into that report and what it means for America's children next. You're watching Meet the President. Welcome back. The kids are not all right. After the coronavirus pandemic shut schools, moved millions of students to online learning, a new federal study shows academic achievement among the nation's 9-year-olds dropped dramatically since 2020. The National Assessment of Educational Progress is the first glimpse we're getting of the magnitude of the learning setbacks thanks to online learning. Average reading scores dropped 5 points from 2020, the largest decline in reading scores in the assessment in more than 30 years. Meanwhile, average scores in math dropped even more, down 7 points from 2020, marking the first time math scores have declined since the National Center for Education Statistics began tracking them. So joining me now is Peggy Carr, Commissioner for the National Center for Education Statistics. It's the statistical branch of the Department of Education in charge of administering the national assessment. Peggy Carr, I really appreciate you here. Let me ask this. When we look at what we saw with 9-year-olds, should we just assume that if you were in school during the pandemic, whether you were 6 in first grade or in 11th grade, you had a learning setback?
Yes, I think we should. It may be differential depending on what kind of resources you had available to you. But yes, you should assume that it was pretty dramatic.
So I guess I look at it two ways. On one hand, if everybody's behind, does that mean we can take a whole sort of a whole picture approach, if you will, meaning, okay, then let's slow things down. Let's move people to, instead of using age per grade, we go to where people are and try to do that, try to move toward where people are in achievement. Is that possible, or is this going to be haphazard for the next few years?
Well, we certainly shouldn't do that. We need to move full speed ahead. This is a moment in time when we really need to focus on the whole education system. A lot of it has been really, really impacted in very, very severe ways. The students, the teachers, the schools themselves, the whole system. It was a wake-up call. No, this is no time to hold back. This is a time to put the foot to the pedal, to the metal, as we would sometimes say, and move things forward. It's a wake-up call.
Well, what does that look like? I mean, I'm just going to give you an example of where I grew up in Miami-Dade. They've got now what I'd call a 3-tiered education system. If you have money, you put your kids in private school. If you don't like your school, but you don't have the money, you get a voucher and you go to a charter school. And then if you're stuck in the public schools, a lot of parents are upset at how bad the public schools have gotten. That seems like a disastrous approach, and you're seeing it everywhere. What do we do to fix this?
Well, this isn't a really condemnation on public schools. We need to sort of step back from those kinds of pronouncements. The public schools have a lot of stressors they have to deal with that private schools don't. And private schools generally score a little higher than public schools, but there's a lot of resilience in the country and pockets of the country in different regions and locales and so forth. It is not definitely a one-size-fits-all. And, I'm with you. I had students of my own, children of my own, that were in public school, then they were in private school, and ended up in public school. And so it really does depend on where you are with your children, what your children need. But all in all, the public schools are doing a great job.
Here we are needing to catch probably more resources in all our schooling at a time when we know that they're resource starved, and I mean in human capital. So it feels like this is a task that was already going to be hard if we had enough teachers. How is there something the federal government more? I know the American Rescue Plan helped. What more can the government do?
Well, we need to focus those resources. If there are more resources to come, we need to look where they are needed most. And these data suggest that. Even though the schools and the whole system turned on a dime and need to be commended for Yeoman's job, there were still some discrepancies, some equity issues with students in low-income areas, students in high minority schools. They still didn't get enough. And when we look at teachers that are struggling, the vacancies that we're seeing, well, differentially, guess where that happens? So we need to have a real focus on where we need these resources. We can do it, but we need to really, really figure out how to best get the benefits for our resources.
What it sounds like is you're saying K through 5, it's probably where we need to double and triple down.
Oh yeah. But you know, the post-secondary sector, they're concerned too. There are a lot of students that didn't show up in the 2-year colleges around the country. And guess what? They're a gateway to a lot of things. Yeah. They're a gateway to 4-year institutions. They're a gateway to, career and technical jobs. So no, I don't want to think that anyone could think this is a K-12 problem. It is all up the line.
Absolutely. Peggy Carr, a commissioner at the Department of Education in the statistical side of things, really appreciate you coming on and sharing your expertise with us. After the break, unemployment rose in today's jobs report, but that might not be such bad news. An economist joins me next to discuss. You're watching Meet the Press Now.
The bottom line is jobs are up, wages are up, people are back to work, and we're seeing some signs that inflation maybe, I'm not overpromising it, may be beginning to ease.
Well, that was a somewhat cautious President Biden there about the inflation numbers, but President Biden is touting those August jobs numbers this morning, seemingly optimistic that inflation may be coming under control. Is it a soft landing? Latest jobs numbers show the economy added 315,000 jobs in August. The unemployment rate rose slightly to 3.7%, up 3.5%. Wages also rose, though just shy of expectations. But these gains come as the Federal Reserve continues to battle inflation. And if you recall, just a couple weeks ago, Jerome Powell warned of some pain ahead as the Federal Reserve prepares to meet later this month and decide what to do about interest rates. Obviously, he was hinting they're likely to go up yet again, even after the 2 consecutive 0.75 point increases that we've already had. So to break this all down, I'm joined by Betsey Stevenson again, former member of President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors and former chief economist at the Department of Labor. So we're not the economists here, you are, but the soft landing and rising interest rates, this is the type of jobs report that looks like what a soft landing would look like, correct?
Oh, yeah. This jobs report is absolutely in the sweet spot of looking like a soft landing. And we are obviously going to need a lot more that look like this to really know that we're going to be able to achieve that soft landing. But what we saw was, unemployment ticked up. That might be a little bit of pain. But actually behind that unemployment ticking up was nearly 800,000 people who entered the labor force last month. So all these additional people are coming in. The labor market wasn't able to absorb all of them, but it absorbed a whole lot of them. And what we'll hopefully see is that even more of them will get jobs again next month, and even more people will come in. And what that means is that employers who've been desperate to hire are going to find that there are workers available for their jobs without having to offer the outsized wage gains that could spark further inflation in the service sector. Right? That's what the Fed has been worried about. They don't want to see people lose their jobs. What they want to see is that employers are able to hire without sparking further inflation.
Given that we have so many open jobs right now, is the unemployment rate, looking for it to go up, really the answer? Or is it simply, do we assume that those jobs, perhaps some of those openings don't get filled and they just don't simply get filled ever? And that's part of the quote unquote soft landing.
You know, it's absolutely the case that we could just see job openings sort of coming down naturally as some of the churning in the labor market settles down. One of the reasons there's so many openings is just because we have a lot of people who are starting new jobs, people who are still leaving jobs. It's just a lot of people still trying to find their way in the I don't want to say post-pandemic, we're not post-pandemic, but in we might say the post-pandemic crisis part of the economy. And so all that underlying churning, I think, has created a lot of openings. Those openings create a lot of opportunities. When there's a lot of opportunities, that encourages people to change jobs. But the main thing that matters is whether demand for workers is exceeding supply of workers. We don't really need to see unemployment come up. What we need to see is, just a closer alignment between demand for workers and the supply of workers. So I think the best news in this report was that we saw so many people come back into the labor force.
Anything, I'm not asking you to read Jay Powell's mind, but anything in this report make you think they will somehow not raise rates as much as they were planning?
Oh, I think Jay Powell's been perfectly clear that 75 basis points, that's a real sort of outlier in terms of how big of an increase. It could be consistent with that. It could be consistent with 50 basis points. I think they're going to take all the data they've got and make a decision between that 75 and 50. There's some sense in which you might ask, does it really matter? Because they're not going to stop with a September rate increase, right? They're going to keep going. They've already said that. And I think what's really going to be the question is, how long do they keep raising rates? If they keep seeing reports like today where things are slowing and they're slow and wage pressure is slowing, so wages weren't up as much as expected, then maybe they won't have to go as far as they thought. What they choose to do in September has more to do with whether they think they need to act really quickly or not.
Well, it seems that there's a wild card that's coming up. It's what happens this fall with energy prices. Do we get a cap on Russian oil? What do we do with Russian oil? How does that impact? Because it feels like that's, even though everything seems to be settling with the supply chain and seems to be settling with inflation and that thing, if we get a spike in energy prices, that could throw the whole thing up in the air, correct?
The biggest news that Jay Powell made at Jackson Hole was to say that the Federal Reserve is responsible for price stability and bringing down inflation no matter what causes it, even if it's a supply shock, even if it's an energy shock. And so what that says is he's like, the buck is going to stop with us. We've got tools to bring down demand. That's our only tools. But our job is to keep prices stable. So if we get a big energy shock, if something things go wrong with energy prices this fall, this winter, then that's going to say that the Fed's going to have to do more to bring inflation down and create that price stability. And Powell wanted to make it absolutely clear that there's no more transitory, wait it out, let's see, the Fed's going to act, even when the prices come from these external forces. So it's absolutely the case that we're going to need some good luck along with good policy making to fully get a soft landing.
Betsey Stevenson, former Obama official in the economy wing, if you will, Council of Economic Advisors, and at the Labor Department. Always appreciate your expertise. Thank you. Well, the White House made some more news this afternoon. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre announced today that President Biden's top domestic climate advisor, Gina McCarthy, will be leaving the administration. Her decision to step down comes after the president signed the landmark climate bill last month that would invest $375 billion to fight climate change. McCarthy served as EPA administrator in the Obama administration, and in the Biden administration, she was tasked with launching what was the first ever White House Climate Policy Office. Basically, think of it as sort of an equivalent of the National Security Advisor, but for climate. And as we are talking about climate, up next, flooding aftermath and excessive heat. Mississippi residents enter a hot Labor Day weekend without drinkable water, as record high temperatures also surge across the West, bringing some potential blackouts. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell is expected to travel to Jackson, Mississippi as the city's water crisis continues. The federal and state response has ramped up in recent days as many residents remain without access to clean drinking water, some without access to any water at all. Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves declared a state of emergency earlier this week. He sent 600 National Guard members to distribute bottled water for residents to drink and use to flush their toilets. Jackson residents have lived under a boil water advisory for a month. But the crisis was escalated when flooding from the Pearl River all but shut down Jackson's water treatment plant. But some residents are optimistic that having this national attention might actually bring change to Mississippi's capital city.
It didn't happen overnight, so it's not going to go away overnight. So we got to just hang in there and just, do what we got to do right now. But I'm just so grateful to God that the world has responded to Jackson, Mississippi. I'm so appreciative. I'm so thankful for the military to be out here to have this organized the way it is.
Do you feel like things are going to change?
Yes, they are.
Nice to have some optimism out there. Appearing with the governor for the first time since the start of the crisis, Jackson's mayor told reporters yesterday that positive gains were made in efforts to restore the plant's functionality, but couldn't give an exact timeline for when water access could be restored. Let's turn now to another climate impact. It's out west. California's facing its worst heat wave of an already brutal summer. It may be September on the calendar, but temperatures are expected to reach triple digits in Southern California in the coming days. It's going to put both Californians' safety and the state's power grid at risk. The National Weather Service has put the majority of the state under an excessive heat warning. Governor Newsom's office extended the state's energy flex alert until today, asking Californians to stagger their energy use to protect the grid from overloading and causing blackouts. It's a worst-case scenario that could leave millions without air conditioning. Gadi Schwartz took a look at which L.A. communities are facing the most risk as these temperatures climb so high.
On the eve of its biggest heat wave of the year, headed out across Los Angeles, a city where the climate is causing a health crisis. The first stop was to meet Marta Segura, the city of Los Angeles' first ever heat officer.
Los Angeles now has a chief heat officer. Why?
Yeah, because heat is our primary climate hazard.
The extreme temperatures paired with pollution are causing severe health problems in the LA area. Everything from asthma to heart disease to premature death. But not everyone's facing the same risk. Marta says it depends on where you live.
We have difference in geography, number one, difference in wind, number two, but that's the part everybody knows. What everybody doesn't know is that there have been historic disinvestments in certain neighborhoods that never got the trees, that never got the shade, that never got vegetation.
Okay, so now we're going to do a quick little experiment. So now we've got, 123, 125. So 120 is on the pavement, 120 is on that sidewalk. But then if we go over here in the shade, that grass, 66. Yep. And then if we look at the building's about 66, 70 degrees too.
The building not only keeps people cooler over there, but their utility bills are much less than somebody who doesn't have shade.
I gotta say, when you're driving around on a hot day like this and you realize that there is a correlation between the amount of trees you see in a neighborhood and the amount of people that are going to the hospital for heat-related stress, it makes you see the city very differently.
And that difference has now been documented by a new UCLA School of Public Health map that tallies heat-related emergency room visits by zip codes, showing wide disparities in the city.
Some of these differences between neighboring zip codes are 3 times higher. They technically should have very similar meteorological patterns, but we see higher excess ER visits during extreme heat events.
So in order to see what some of that inequity looks like, we're going to head over to the valley, see some neighborhoods where there is almost no tree cover, and they're expected to see triple-digit temperatures all week long.
In the northeast Los Angeles community of Sun Valley, we met Imelda Padilla, the area's representative on the LA Climate Crisis Council.
We are a community where there is 3 freeways cutting through.
When a heat wave like this comes through, a lot of people just think, well, just stay inside, use your air conditioning. But the truth is, not everybody can afford it, right?
Yeah, so we know that heat affects population by age. And the 2 ages that are affected most by heat wave are senior citizens and college students.
The reality is people have been dying, people will die, and for them it's too late.
Based on the income, based on the age, definitely this is the kind of place where something like that might happen.
I'm joined now by Gadi Schwartz, who's basically been on this beat right now, what's turned into a climate beat here. You know, Gadi, I'm curious, what is LA trying to do? You know, a lot of these sort of drier communities, you know, over time, you know, built houses for breezes, didn't have AC. I know there's a lot of older Southern California communities that have houses without central air. What are they doing to try to help those folks out?
Well, Chuck, right now the city of Los Angeles sees this as an immediate problem that needs short-term and long-term solutions. To get us through this heat wave, they're doing a bunch of cooling centers and rec senior centers across the city. But in the long term, they're trying to start planning for more shade, and that means planting trees. That means green zones in areas that have historically seen things like racist redlining of the past, where there was a lot of investment in affluent neighborhoods, and yet other neighborhoods didn't see any of those plantings with public money. So that's one thing that they have on the horizon. However, all of that is going to have to be done during a drought when we continue to see these prolonged heat waves in the future and water restrictions. So It's a very difficult situation that seems to be getting worse.
And Gadi, you know, when you think about Southern California and you think about heat, then all of a sudden you got to wonder, is it going to be too dry? Are we suddenly got to fear wildfires?
Exactly. You've got wildfires on the mind. You also are starting to see this summer that goes well into September, October. So now all of a sudden September and October are seen as summer months here. And so you've got the wildfire danger. And then you've also got this drought. And one of the experts told us that in the past there have been heat waves. Southern California gets hot in the summer, but usually you would see those heat waves last maybe 1-2 days. Now they're lasting a week. Maybe even longer than a week, and it's very difficult for the human body to recover after 2 days of a heat wave, let alone a week.
I tell you, Gadi, I know I have good friends in Southern California who thought they were going to retire there. They're not now because of the environment. They realize they love it, but they feel like the environment's going to make it really too hard for them to retire there. Anyway, Gadi Schwartz in Southern California for us. Gadi, thank you. And thank you all for being with us this hour. We're going to be back next week with more Meet the Press Now. And if it's Sunday, we've got a special edition of Meet the Press. It'll be on your local NBC News station. We're taking the whole hour to examine policing in America through the lens of one case. It's the tragic death of 19-year-old Anton Black. I really hope you watch it. NBC News Now coverage continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.